Now, I'm interested in the Collaery case and witness K. Now, I'm particularly concerned about these matters because, as I understand it, the prosecution policy of the CDP is set out on your website. It states a two-stage process be satisfied for the prosecution to commence. One, that there's sufficient evidence for a prosecution case, and two, that the prosecution has to be in the public interest. And,
Senator Carr, you're reading from which website? Could you just clarify?
The CDPP website. Am I correct?
Thank you.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Now, I'm just wondering if you could assist me here. What is the public interest in prosecuting Bernard Collaery and witness K?
Well, Senator, we've applied the policy in those cases and we've determined that it is in the public interest to proceed with those prosecutions of Mr Collaery and witness K.
But that's not an explanation of what is the public interest. You've made a determination that there is a public interest. I'm asking a different question. What is the public interest?
Well, the public interest is, according to our test, a broad set of criteria that collectively go to the question of whether it's in the public interest to proceed with the prosecution. And there's many matters that go into determining whether a prosecution should proceed on the basis in the public interest, and that's the criteria we apply.
Well, last June there was a secret court hearing regarding whether the trial on these men should be conducted in secret, and as I understand was being pursued by the government. And I understand last week the decision was appealed, and the appeal was also conducted in secret. It's reported on the ABC Media Watch on Monday this week that the subject matter of the prosecutions that the government was seeking to suppress, including allegations that the former Liberal Party Foreign Minister, Mr Downer, and the former Liberal Party Attorney General, Mr George Brandis, as he is now, approved the bugging of the East Timor Cabinet Room during sensitive commercial treaty negotiations.
Senator Carr, I'm not disputing your right to raise these matters, but you've referred to a Media Watch report. Is it possible that we could distribute that, and if you have a transcript, that would be preferable? So, so this, you're repeating what was said.
I will on this occasion because it serves another purpose. If you'd like to pass it on.
Well,
yes,
obviously...
but no, because I don't agree with your interpretation of how things work here, but nonetheless I will for this purpose.
Well, it is a practice that...
Well, it's a practice you have followed. It's not a practice that it is generally followed.
Very clearly set out in Odge's Senate practice that where a witness is asked to respond to information contained in a document or in a transcript, that they are provided with a copy of that document.
I'm making an observation here.
Does that apply the other way when they're reading from a brief?
Let's not get into
well,
a
I
debate
think it's
about
relevant.
this.
I mean, if you
Senator Carr, you have
to
the
be
call.
even on each side.
It's a reasonable point. If the, I can recall that when I sat on the other side of the table, the briefs were very interesting. Many of the material that I've been seeking for many years was suddenly revealed to me. So it's always an interesting thing. You're often surprised. You're often surprised by what you discover when you get on the other side of the table. I found, particularly when you're representing another minister, I might find.
So it is a.
If you can let me
issue
finish,
is a matter of
I'll try to get
Senator
to the
Carr,
point
if
here.
I could just clarify that this issue is a matter of courtesy, in that it would be unfair for witnesses to be required to answer questions when they don't have.
Let me finish the question, and you might be able to
when they don't
more accurately
Senator
reflect
Carr,
on proceedings.
When they don't have access to the document in question. So
look. If I could finish the question, we could then deal with the matter.
Thank you, Senator Carr. You have the call.
Thank you. Now, what was stated there was that matters of being suppressed or attempted being suppressed were concerned the actions of the previous government in terms of the bugging of the East Timor Cabinet Room during sensitive commercial negotiations, which were discussed in interviews on multiple ABC programs 7 years ago, and that those interviews are still available online in the world today. They're still online at the ABC. Now, that's the first point I want to make. So is it correct that the DPP has the power to discontinue a prosecution if it's no longer in the public interest to proceed?
That's correct, Senator.
Thank you. Is it also correct that the Attorney-General can withdraw her consent to these prosecutions?
I might take that question on notice, Senator.
Thank you. I'm just noting that there's been a lack of progress in these prosecutions. No trial date appears to have been set, despite the prosecutions being commenced 3 years ago, and despite the fact there's been dozens of hearings.
And $3.4 million spent.
Nearly $4 million has been spent, if including the department, court costs, prosecution and police resources been considered, and that these prosecutions relate to events that allegedly occurred 17 years ago, and that there's been no suggestion that either of the accused pose any threat to the public, particularly Mr Cleary, who's a respected lawyer, former Deputy Chief Minister and Attorney General of the Australian Capital Territory, and I might add turned 74 this year. I'm wondering if you could explain why the public interest continues to be served by these prosecutions. Could you do that for me?
Well, Senator, just with respect to the progress of the matters, the witness K matter is fixed for a plea hearing in the ACT Magistrates Court on the 3rd and 4th of June of 2021. So that's coming to resolution very soon.
Successfully worn them down.
So, well, no, that's just hang on. But I'm actually understand, I mean, on that point, I understand that's been held up by disagreements over whether there can be access to the affidavits used by the East Timor in the international proceedings in The Hague, which the lawyers are arguing needs to be before the court for the sentencing. Is that correct?
My understanding, Senator, is that the matters are expected to proceed on the 3rd and 4th of June.
Okay. So, but the proposition I put to you, is that correct, that there is in fact a requirement that the affidavits that have been used in international proceedings in The Hague are required before the sentencing proceedings can in fact proceed?
I'm not aware of that, Senator, but I'm happy to explore that on notice if you'd like me to.
Wouldn't mind, I appreciate that. So if you could continue with your, sorry I interrupt you, but that's, I think, important, that does need to be clarified.
Yes, Senator. So just in terms of the matter of Mr Colleary, you'll be aware that we are awaiting judgment in that matter. It's been on appeal before the ACT Court of Appeal, and judgment's now pending. So there has been interlocutory appeals that have taken some time. Obviously, these matters have also been impacted by some of the delays that have been occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. So, and they're very complex matters.
Indeed they are. Look, it is ultimately a question of priority, and I'd put it to political priority. I mean, there are any number of substantive questions that relate to the unlawful diversion of taxpayers' money across the Commonwealth. I could, if you want me to go through a few, I can. I'm just wondering, why is it that this matter has the priority it's been given? I mean, where's the priority given to robo-debt, for instance? The situation around a number of matters. I could, as I say, I could list a number of scandals that this government do involve matters that I would have thought were reasonable for prosecution. Why has this particular matter got such priority that we could devote resources of this type, over $4 million, given so little progress has been made in the circumstances where you've got people of I think, and that's Mr Cleary, quite extraordinary distinction. Why is it?
Well, Senator, in terms of the costs you've referred to, they're not the costs of the prosecution. We haven't spent anything like that. So as of the 14th of May, the total external legal costs incurred by the DPP in the prosecution of Mr Colleary have been $110,210. That's GST exclusive. And the total external costs in relation to witness K are in the vicinity of $127,313. So those costs might pertain to the litigation costs of other parties. But in terms of priorities and as to whether...
Sorry, that is grossly different to an answer that has been provided to the Senate as to the taxpayers' resources paid.
Sorry,
I wonder if there's a difference. Are you only referring to some number inside the DPP? Is that?
That's correct.
That's what he's doing.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make it clear what, in terms of the costs,
I'm
what the
saying
costs of the prosecution.
Commonwealth. The cost to the Commonwealth is substantially higher than that. And I don't think that in any way detracts from what appears to be a vindictive action against these people, because someone wants to silence them for raising what is effectively whistleblowing activity in what appears to me to be quite extraordinary action to bug a friendly nation involved with a commercial dispute. I don't see what the national interest could possibly be.
Well, Senator, our decision to prosecute has been made very carefully in both of these matters, based on an assessment of the evidence that's been presented to us in the briefs of evidence.
Just in relation to that, can I please, Senator Carr?
Yes.
I was in East Timor.
Sorry, Senator Patrick, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair. I was in East Timor across a couple of visits. One of them a parliamentary visit, and it was very clear to me on the ground that the East Timorese were very, very upset with Australia, and it has an effect on the way in which they view Australia, because Mr Colleary and Witness K are a hero up there. I met with the President's Chief of Staff in relation to this particular issue, and we have a situation where, to our north, the Chinese are investing significant amounts of money in East Timor. Go on their southern plateau, look at the freeways they're building, the power lines they're building, the ports they're building in the north. Does the effect that this prosecution has on the East Timorese and their view towards perhaps other nations assisting them rather than Australia have any? Are they being considered in this prosecution, in your consideration of public interest?
Senator, we've made an assessment based on the evidence that we have presented for us in the briefing.
I'm talking, this is a matter of public interest. The way in which the country of East Timor and the people of East Timor view us, and in fact the way in which they engage other countries which may not be in our national interest. You know, this is not just about evidence. This is a much, much bigger issue, and it disturbs me if you're saying you haven't considered such factors moving forward with the prosecution.
Well, our focus has been on the evidence.
Yeah, not on the national interest.
Well,
the evidence you're giving is you haven't considered this from a national interest perspective, and flowing from that, you haven't properly considered this from the public interest perspective.
Well, Senator, I dispute that. I think we have considered the evidence and we've considered the public interest and we've applied the prosecution policy.
Okay, so how did you consider the public interest if you didn't consider the propositions that I've just put to you about how the East Timorese feel about Australia proceeding with this prosecution?
Well, I'm not sure that when we assess this case, Senator, that we would have had evidence or had regard to how people in East Timor feel about the prosecutions. That probably would be a step beyond the scope of the matters that we would normally consider in determining whether it was in the
Okay, and
public
I
interest.
accept that, but that's where it goes to the Attorney General, who has that ultimate responsibility. So the DPP have just indicated that they haven't considered the effect of this prosecution on our relations with East Timor, and the effect that has on perhaps the way in which they view cooperation with this country and indeed accept support from other countries that are not within our interest.
Senator Patrick, can I just, don't want to interrupt your chain of questions here, other than to just clarify with the
With all
Acting
due
Director of
respect,
Public...
That is not the evidence that I understood the CDPP to give, and if we could just
he was
ensure...
saying that wasn't considered, and I accept that.
I don't...
And there were some key words
Okay.
that were actually put in at the end of exactly what you just said, Senator Patrick.
Perhaps you can repeat those for me.
Or perhaps Mr Bruckard could repeat them for you. It's his evidence.
I heard you... Did you say there's some doubt as to whether... You said, I'm not sure that those matters were...
Well, I don't, Senator.
Considered,
Obviously, these
that's my
matters
recollection.
are before the court. So to dissect our evidence, our examination of the public interest here might be awkward with the matters pending before the courts. But what
I don't think the Senate can be constrained in such an important national matter that goes to our relationships with East Timor and the way, we might end up spending billions and billions of dollars on additional defence equipment simply because the East Timor turns somewhere else for support because they are disgusted in the way in which we are prosecuting two people who they view as heroes.
Senator Patrick, I'm not, as I say, I'm not trying to interrupt your line of questioning here.
Well, you're doing a good
just
job.
Just by way of clarification, in relation to the public interest test, is that a test that you only consider prior to launching proceedings, or is there an ongoing obligation to consider the public interest throughout the duration of the proceedings? Could you just clarify that?
That's correct, Chair. We apply the public interest test at the time we make a decision whether or not to commence a prosecution, and then we keep the matter under review as it moves through the court system if we've decided to proceed with a prosecution.
So there's an ongoing obligation on you, the Commonwealth DPP, to continue to assess the public interest.
That's correct. We do that as a matter of course to make sure that the ground hasn't changed beneath us, so to speak. There's not new evidence that's emerged, or we become aware of, personal circumstances or...
Can I bring you back to where I actually started this?
Senator
No, that's
Patrick
fair.
does
I
have
was
one.
just-
Yeah, but you want to answer your question?
No, that's
but
fair.
I'm just...
All right,
You see,
Senator
See, as
Carr.
I understood your statements to begin with, Mr. Brucker, the proposition you put to us is that you consider the evidence, and if there's a reasonable prospect of conviction based on the evidence that's available. Then there is the question, if sufficient evidence is available, whether the prosecution would actually be in the public interest. Now, the public interest is a very broad concept. And I would say that the public interest in the normal meaning of that term would include diplomatic relations. It would include whether or not it's actually in the public, whether the public would appreciate whether the interest is being well served by prosecuting people that actually acted as whistleblowers in what I would have thought there's a moral dimension to the public interest as well, isn't there?
Well, Senator, I think in relation to those broader matters, obviously in these particular cases, there's a need to obtain the consent of the attorney. And one imagines that insofar as the attorney determines whether or not to provide a consent to the prosecutions, there may be scope to consider those broader,
That's right.
bigger picture issues.
And there is a political dimension. That's why the attorney's there.
Well, these are offences that require the consent of
Of
the
course
attorney.
they are. They're highly political events.
Well,
And that's why I asked you, can you have a position? You said you can review it, new ongoing consent issue does arise, and you've taken on notice where you've said in terms of your position, but also whether or not the attorney can withdraw consent, and you've taken that on notice.
That's correct.
So, in other words, can you change your mind?
Well, the DPP can certainly change our mind.
Yeah,
in
but
relation
can the government change its mind?
Can the attorney?
Can the political circumstances change, for instance?
Sorry, attorney, were you getting some advice then?
No, I was just
Move
asking
the
what,
chair.
no, I was not getting advice, no.
Because
Senator Carr,
Mr
look,
Anderson did say to
I'd
me
like
yesterday.
To actually, Senator Patrick, if I could just take a couple of questions, if I could, just for a moment. I just want to, Senator Carr just said, Mr Brackard, that he put to you that these were highly political events. Do you agree with that proposition?
Well, I think it was put that it was a highly political offence.
Offence?
I'm
Sorry,
not sure
I
whether
heard of
I'm not sure whether that's the
Event.
senator's characterisation.
I'll use the term event. Event. That is
Meaning the
the
prosecution.
circumstances around the allegation here is that information was provided to, the allegation is that information provided to the Timorese government and to journalists.
So, Senator Carr,
that's the nub of it, isn't it?
I've just taken the call, so I can just seek a couple of clarifying matters. So do you agree with the position that Senator Carr has put to you that these are highly political events?
Well,
I mean, I'm asking that in relation to your independence as the Commonwealth DPP.
Probably the best way to answer that question, Chair, is to say that when we made our decision in this case and in our continuing review of it, we don't do that on the basis of the political consequences of our decision making. So the prosecution policy, is very much focused on looking at the evidence and whether it's in the public interest.
But the public interest is inherently political.
Sorry, Senator Carr, I have the call at the moment, so I just would like to make these.
So, Chair, we don't make our decisions around prosecution based on whether we think it's going to be in the political interests of one group of people.
That's a different meaning of the word political.
Sorry, Senator Carr, I have the call at the moment. So, Mr Brackard, in saying that you don't make a decision based on any political events, so you exercise your discretion quite independently from the executive of any government, whether it's this government in power or any other government.
That's very correct. Yep, and that's in our DNA as prosecutors.
And when you speak of the consent of the Attorney General, can you describe what you mean by that? Do you mean by that the Attorney has the discretion to not agree to your independent decision, or is it an active obligation that you must proactively seek her consent? Could you just explain how your statutory obligation operates in relation to the Attorney's role?
Certainly, Senator. Not all offences require the consent of the Attorney. There's a narrow basket of offences which the Parliament has determined require the consent of the Attorney before the prosecution can proceed.
And can you describe the nature of those offences which require consent?
There's a broad range. There's for example, some child sex offending that might take place in relation to people who are below the age of 18. There's certain offences that take place outside of the jurisdiction of Australia which require consent. So there's a basket of offences, and some of those are structured in a way where you can imagine that there might be concerns that the Attorney would have about matters of international relations or alike, which are not front and centre insofar as our assessment of the evidence is concerned. So in terms of the process, we get matters referred to us from investigative agencies, we apply the prosecution policy, we make a determination, and if we think that there is a prima facie case and a reasonable prospect of conviction, and it is in the public interest, it's at that point that we go to the Attorney and seek the attorney's consent to the prosecution.
Thanks,
so it's
Mr.
an extra
Brockhart.
layer.
Mr Brockhart,
So Senator Carr, I will now give you the call.
thank you very much. And so perhaps you could explain to me the difference between the public interest and the national interest.
Well, it depends what you mean by the national
No,
interest.
I'm asking
Senator.
you to explain to me, because you see, I put to you that this is an inherently political process. Now, you've thought I meant party political. I haven't even mentioned that yet. Right? I mean, I can go to that. Right? There is clearly that element to this, but I'm saying there is a national interest question here that you have to assess, and that the public interest and the national interest need to be assessed, and they are often, in fact, the national interest is inherently a political determination. What is in the nation's interest is a political question.
Senator, it's a bit hard for me to in effect, answer that question without providing you with a more fulsome account of what the evidence is.
Yeah, I know, and that's why I've asked up front, why is this in the public interest to prosecute these people? That's why it's such an important question. And why has it all been done in secret?
Well, Senator, I don't believe it is all being done in secret. I don't think that's correct. The proceedings in Witness K, for example, have all been heard in open court. There's been no closed court proceedings in the Witness K matter. And we're hoping, of course, when the plea proceeds, that it'll be able to proceed in open court. There may be some component of the material which will need to be heard in camera or the subject of closed submissions. But we're working through those issues with the court and with counsel for the defendant. And in relation to Mr Cleary's matter, it hasn't yet gone to trial. The legal issues that are to be resolved relate to preliminary questions about the extent to which the court needs to be closed.
I don't think I take that much further, but...
All right, thanks very much, Senator Carr.
Clearly indicating my profound disquiet at what's going on in this